We're with Harry Peachey at the Columbus Zoo with a new topic today. We want to talk about population management. We talk about endangered species, and we talk about too many, for instance, white-tailed deer and one thing another. And Harry, I want you to lead us through that discussion a little bit and give people some insight as to what's really going on with management of different populations, wildlife, and so forth.
Sure. Well, I think everybody expects when they come to the zoo to see babies, and they know that we're very proud of our success with breeding here at Columbus. We like to get our new babies out in front of the public, something that everybody enjoys. But reproduction in a zoo, in a contemporary zoo, is not simply a matter of putting a male and a female together. We look at particular species that we are interested in breeding, that we will emphasize. There are other species that we actually try very hard not to breed. We manage several species as a megapopulation, if you would. So when we look at the population, look at the species, what we want to do with it, we take into consideration every animal of that species, every member of that species that's in every AZA zoo in North America. So although we may have, for example, we've got 4 lions here at Columbus right now, when we look at the population, we talk about 400 lions, and we manage accordingly. We try and balance out genetic representation, extremely important. It's not just a matter of avoiding breeding animals that are related to one another directly, half-sibs or cousins, but we'll go back several generations just to make sure that we keep as much genetic diversity in that population as we can. The point of that is to make sure that these animals are ready and available for reintroduction if and when it ever becomes a possibility, because genetic diversity is what animals use to develop the tactics they need to cope with a changing environment. If you accept evolution, evolution is based on genetic diversity. It also relates to the genetic health of the population, even through a couple of generations. If you don't pay attention to that kind of thing, you can have diseases which are a result of recessive genes become prominent in the population, and the population will crash.
And then with that, there's some species that are so endangered that we're scrambling any way we can to preserve them. And does the Columbus Zoo do anything like embryo transfer or test tube babies, so to speak, when you talk about those things?
Well, that kind of assisted reproduction, that kind of technology is a little bit beyond what we're capable of doing with exotics. When we look at assisted reproduction, we look at what's been done with domestic livestock, and that's our model. But you can't even use dairy cattle extender for beef cattle. So we can't take it and use it for a rhino or an impala or something like that. We'll use the same ingredients and we'll look at the models that exist, but you have to experiment and come up with an extender that's going to work. When you talk about embryo transfer, that becomes even more complex. But we are working with several species in that regard. We just recently performed artificial insemination on a Pallas cat. This is a very, very small cat that lives in Mongolia. Looks a lot like a domestic cat, like a Persian cat, except that they are very aggressive and nasty. The population here in the United States is very, very small. They, as far as we can tell, are probably in tough shape in the wild. It's hard to census these animals because, again, they live in a desert, they live in burrows, so we don't know how many there are, but we don't think there's a whole lot. So we want to try and preserve the species for that time if and when reintroduction becomes both possible and necessary. You have to have the habitat. We have to be able to train these animals to survive on their own. And then, of course, we need the funds, the resources to undertake that kind of operation. But because they don't breed well in zoos, we actually, in cooperation with the Cincinnati Zoo, just recently did an artificial insemination on our female. Our female is very old. She is 9 years old. It's not likely that she's going to conceive. And in fact, when we did the procedure, we took a look at her ovaries and saw that there was a lot of fibrosis, things like that going on. So we're not optimistic, but it's worth a try. You have to do everything you can do to breed these species that are so highly endangered in the wild and so rare here in zoos.
So let's talk about now where you've used an assisted reproduction program, and you've been very successful, and maybe even with other zoos involved in one thing or another. And now we got to talk about managing that population and making sure that the genetics are as good as we can make them.
Right. Well, We don't breed elephants by artificial reproduction here at Columbus. We've used natural reproduction, but we are prepared to go the artificial route if we needed to. And other zoos have done that. And one of the interesting things we've found out with elephants is that even though a visitor that comes to the zoo may have a difficult time telling the difference between an Asian elephant and an African elephant, when it comes to sperm, the difference is significant. For example, we have extenders that work for African elephants. It does not work for Asian elephants, and we haven't been able to come up with an extender that does. So if you're going to try artificial reproduction with Asians, you've got to have the bull where the cow is. If you have the bull where the cow is, you can look at going the natural route. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you still need to take that extra step and go into assisted reproduction. On the other hand, assisted reproduction with Africans has had a lot of success. There are a number of calves, African calves in the United States, that have been born as a result of artificial insemination. So there's hope for Asian elephants. At some point, we'll work that out, but it's going to take a lot of work.
You know, as a veterinarian, and I know our audience is going to be interested, we talked about, this is a little side note leading up to this, we talked about extenders, right, and what the science is involved in reproduction. And if you would, just describe what you're talking about when you say a semen extender.
Okay, well, a semen extender is a recipe, if you will, that you use to extend the life of a sperm cell. That's why it's referred to as an extender. And typically these recipes, and I call it a recipe because of the familiar ingredients, it may have orange juice in it, it may have egg yolk in it. It sounds like you could whip one of these up in your kitchen, and you probably could.
I have.
Well, there you go. So it can be done. But again, there is not a one-size-fits-all recipe for semen extenders. They are very, very species specific. And there's been a lot of work done looking at different extenders for Asian elephant semen, but we just haven't come across the right one. And you can also, too, imagine that there are not a whole lot of people that are working on this. Worldwide, there might be 8 or 10 people that are working with semen extenders for Asian elephants. And some of those people are going to be grad students. So really, a professor and a grad student, and my apologies to all the grad students, amounts to 1.5 people working on that project, with the grad student putting in all the work and the faculty member being the half person. But I'm just kidding. But actually, again, that's not a lot of people working on a very, very big project.
What is one of the most successful species programs you've had in terms of population management and in terms of being able to determine the genetic diversity, and I don't know, are they doing DNA analysis and that sort of thing, looking at these things?
They typically don't because it's expensive. They tend to go the old-fashioned route, and they look at lineages for a lot of these species, and for any species that's managed in an SSP, which is a species survival program, and that's this this multi-institutional population management program that we're talking about. They look at the lineage, the known lineage. If you have animals that were wild-born, then those are considered founders. Those are the animals that are going to start our population here in North America. And then you just keep track of that animal's history. You know who the sire is, if it's a second generation, the grandsire, and so on through successive generations, and make sure that these family trees remain as separate as you can. Sometimes you can't. If you have a very small population, at some point you're going to run out of options, and you will start breeding animals that are related, hopefully way, way back in their history. But we're careful not to engage in really close inbreeding. Tigers at one time, about 20-some years ago, we looked at the tiger population in the United States, Siberian tigers specifically. There were more Siberian tigers, and this is still the case, in North America than there are in the wild. So this is obviously a species that is in critical situation in the wild. We have a lot of potential to help it out, but our population was very mixed. It was very heavily inbred, so we actually stopped breeding Siberian tigers for a while. Each female was entitled to 1 litter. Each male was entitled to sire 1 litter, and not every animal in that litter was going to go on to contribute to the next generation. Now it's gotten to the point where all of those problems have been straightened out, we hope, and we can manage that population with a little bit more leeway. But we had things like cataracts, dwarfism, things that were showing up in that species that were creating tremendous problems.
Would you consider the tiger program to be one of your most successful programs that zoos across the country have worked with, or are there other programs equally so successful?
Well, there are some programs that have a tremendous history of success. Gorillas actually is one that Columbus has been involved in. We, of course, were the site of the first birth of a gorilla in the zoo, the first second generation birth of a gorilla in the zoo. So we've got a long track record. We've set up surrogacy programs where we take gorillas that are born to moms that are not capable moms, and we come and raise them in a social group here, bring them here to Columbus. They get raised in a social group so that they can grow up to be a gorilla. It's a multifaceted program that has been very successful because they have been willing to kind of go out on a limb and experiment with new approaches. The surrogacy program is just one example.
Harry, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today about the program. And how can people learn more about the Columbus Zoo?
Well, obviously you can come out here. That's really the best way to do it, and then you get to have a good time as well. It's a great family environment. It's a great environment for a student. But you can also look at our website. One thing that Columbus does that I'm particularly proud of is support a lot of field research and conservation efforts that affect these species directly in the wild. There is information about that on our website. In fact, our conservation report for 2010 just went up on the website.
And the website is?
www.columbuszoo.org.